you, Captain Crawford, for talking with me. Can you talk about your high school years a little bit?
Talking about what?
Your high school years.
Oh yes, well I went to a school in New Hampshire. Well, fortunate, it was a small enough school so that we didn't have a high school in town. And we had what was not, the name hadn't been vouched as invented, but the town said anybody, boy or girl, that wants to go on to college, you know, good college, can go to pay the way to this prep school in town. The school was Tilton School. And with that background, I mean, we had it was a tremendous school. We could ski to school. I could ski from my home. I was a townie, therefore sort of a second-class citizen. But if you played football, which I did, and skied, that would cover a lot of difficulties. The way I got along with girls to the limited extent I did was, since I know how to ski, and ski was coming in then in popularity, girls would ask me if I'd teach them how to ski.
Oh, okay.
And my standard approach was, can you dance? I answered, dance. If you can dance, you can ski. You
okay. Yeah. What is your most vivid memory of high school?
My most vivid memory of high school was the excellence of the education. I mean, I was aware that if you went to Tilton School, even though you're from this little rural town, you could go into Dartmouth, McGill, Cornell. In fact, I won a four-year scholarship to Cornell from, and largely on the excellence of the education of this school. And also when it came later to going to the Naval Academy, boy, it paid off big time.
Yeah. Were you aware of the looming international situation in high school?
No, yes, more than usual, but it was different than, I can remember that this was the 1930s, and that was a time when there was a large measure of antipathy worldwide against all forms of you know, settling conflicts by weapons. I mean, I can remember there's an article in Fortune magazine called Fortunes of Death, and we had a Latin prof who inculcated in us the idea that war was futile, even though we were studying Caesar's God War. You take Latin?
No, I don't. I take Spanish.
Okay, go ahead.
What inspired you to go to the Naval Academy?
You know, very frankly, I wish I could say my answer was. I wish I could say my answer was because I wanted to serve the United States and felt that being in the United States Navy was the best way I could do it. That isn't the real answer. The real answer is that that I knew that both West Point and the Naval Academy gave a free education. In fact, they paid you for going there. And it was excellent. They had an excellent reputation, particularly in technology. And so, by getting an appointment to the Naval, well, actually I went first to West Point, but that's another story. I passed the exam. But next year the senator convinced me, largely because of the superior engineering education of the Naval Academy, that I might want to go there.
Okay.
So that's what had happened, but later I came to love the United States Navy.
Oh, okay. What were some of the key life lessons you learned at the Academy? One of the key life
lessons I learned, well, first of all, let me tell you one that was given me by a Navy captain of the battleship New York. So when I was a plebe, wrote me a letter. He'd been to the Tilton School too, and said he said I want to tell him the two things. One, stand as high as you possibly could in your class. Everything depended on that for your whole career. And the second one was, don't run with the girls. I think that meant stay away from the girls. He said they'll ruin your class standing. So that was the first lesson I learned there. And I had a motive for staying away from the girls. I wanted to go to MIT more than, I really wanted to go to MIT. So I knew that if you weren't in the first 25 of your class, you probably couldn't make it to MIT. So since this captain was kind enough to tell me to stay away from the girls, I maybe overdid it a little bit. In retrospect, I think I overdid it a little bit. I mean, by avoiding them.
Yeah.
Because I never took a girl to a hop where there wasn't some pressure applied, like my first classman, my grand aunt wanted so and so wanted to take me. Anyway, you can understand.
Okay, yeah. What was life like at the academy?
Contrary to what you may think, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I mean, maybe I did some things right. I went out for football, but I got cut from the plebe team, and so, but I was good enough to make the first battalion team, and that way, most of the upperclassmen most of the other players were upperclassmen, so they wouldn't let me behave. None of the upperclassmen could maltreat me, by asking me to take much of my time, doing push-ups or anything like that. I lived a pretty good life as a plebe, I have to say that.
Okay. When you first enrolled at the academy, did you anticipate the coming war?
Not in the slightest. No, not from the first 2 years. But then suddenly, in 1940, the summer of 1940, well, first of all, yeah, the English Declaration of War against Germany, I think, was September 1st, 1939. In mid-1940, we were on destroyer cruise, having a good time along the East Coast, and we were suddenly called back. All ships returned to the Naval Academy in mid-August. We were sent on 1 month leave, and then reported back to the Naval Academy, and then the whole school went on about a 14-month schedule where the academic work was completed, but they shortened on the practical training so that we could graduate in mid-December. Now note that the war came on December 7th. So when they brought us back, we knew that something was brewing, that the Navy had figured out we were going to be in war, and they were short of junior officers. So, yeah.
All right. What were your first thoughts when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, actually, first thoughts of I was in my room Sunday afternoon at Bancroft Hall studying for an electrical engineering exam, and my plebe, Mr. McClure, came in and said, Mr. Crawford, the Japs are bombing Pearl Harbor. Well, that seemed so outrageous that I grabbed a broom and I said, Mr. McPeak was his name. McPeak, you want this or get out? So I didn't know until the evening meal formation that was for real.
Wow.
And I guess like most of us, it was stunned. I mean, it just didn't, it was the farthest thing from, I think, the thoughts of any of them.
Can you tell me about your naval service during World War II?
Yes. First of all, by October of 1941, we knew we were going to sea early than expected. I was happy to receive a set of orders to the USS Oklahoma. Now, when Pearl Harbor actually, right after Pearl Harbor, I was doggone glad that we hadn't completed the course earlier. I might not be talking to you. So, since my ship was sunk, they sent me in together with a small cadre of guys to MIT to study radar, which was relatively new at that time. Then I went out to the Pacific to be assigned to as a junior officer to the ship, largely because, or important part, because she had one of the new CXAM radar transmitters. And I had to fight to get aboard ship. I really did. First of all, the Yorktown came in from the Coral Sea in late May of 1942, and I had immediately the next day asked my boss to detach me so I could go aboard, and he said, down, boy. I mean, our ship's going to be in here for repairs for a couple of months, and that was the general view. I didn't trust him. I mean, he wanted to keep me there, I'm sure, to use me. I wanted to get aboard ship because I knew the Yorktown had been at sea for 100 days the last time, and I wasn't going to miss this trip.
Yeah.
So I hustled up to the duty officer, no matter what my boss said, got a set of detachment order typed on my orders, and then I went up. I knew I had to get either the district commandant or his deputy sign the orders. So I went up, and by this time it was 6 o'clock at night. I went to the door, and the Guam boy came and said, Captain Stevens in movies. I said, please get him out. He looked, blinked, and when the captain came through the door, he blinked too. He looked at my ensign bar. He said, you mean to say you got me out to sign the orders? I said, yes, sir. He said, where'd you go to school? I said, the Naval Academy, sir. And well, he then knew it was going to hell down there. I said, kept running around the room. He would run around, spouting off at me. I had my orders and the pen in hand, and as soon as he calmed down, I kept telling the captain all I wanted to do was go to sea.
Yeah.
So he signed the orders and I took off. And I got aboard at 10 o'clock at night, the night before the Yorktown deployed for Midway.
Could you describe a typical day aboard the USS Yorktown?
A typical day aboard the, well, at that, I can't really do it because I wasn't at sea long enough. I was only aboard the Yorktown for 4 days, but 5 days before she was sunk. But my day, the captain, the exec says, well, why don't you get familiar with the ship, and meanwhile get yourself on standing watches on the bridge, which I did. And so anytime we were standing 4 on and 8 off, so when I was off, I would take my self-conducted tour of finding where bow and stern were. Okay.
All right. What was the war situation in the Pacific like before the Battle of Midway?
What was the situation in the Pacific?
Yeah.
Well, the general situation in the Pacific is that the Japanese, well, they did just what Admiral Moto said they would do. He said, he didn't particularly want to go to war, but he said, they asked him, you know, what he predicted. He said, for 6 months, we can probably run wild. He said, after that, I can't predict anything. Boy, he was right on the mark, because the Japanese fleet, particularly their carrier striking force, Kudo Butai, they ran wild they ran far east into the Indian Ocean, down towards Australia, and it wasn't until we began, the first time we stopped them was at the Battle of the Coral Sea. But then we had surprisingly good intelligence about what was going to happen next. Are you familiar with that story?
No, I'm not.
Well, I'll tell you from my way I saw it. When I went aboard the Yorktown, and shortly after, when you left Pearl, first thing you do was take the air group aboard. They don't hoist the planes aboard; they fly them aboard.
Okay.
So after that was over, they called all the officers to the wardroom, and in a map about as large as this wall here, a commander told us what was going to happen in the next few days. Well, he said that the entire Japanese combined fleet was heading east. They felt pretty sure the target was Midway. There were 4 fleets. The invasion fleet heading to the Aleutians, which was a diversionary. We found out. They predicted was diversionary. We had the striking force, 4 carriers of Kudo Butai, possibly 6, and they mentioned the names. Kaga, Kagi, Soryu, and Hiryu. And then there was the invasion, the main body, which was there was mostly carriers and not carriers, but battleships and cruisers was going to follow up. And also to the south of Midway, there was south and west, there was the invasion force. In other words, as soon as Kudo Butai, the carriers had established control over Midway, then the invasion force would come in.
How did Midway change the war?
From my perspective, let me give it to you from my perspective. I think you can see from that. My next ship was a CV, escort carrier that was just finishing up modernization in Norfolk area, and so I reported aboard. And by late September, October, we were on our way for North Africa with about 57 or so ships. I mean, you go up on the bridge and look around, ships from one point of the horizon to the other. Then, of course, we made the invasion of North Africa. But in retrospect, I say to myself, well, if, and everybody can, if we had lost it in the Battle of Midway, we would have been down probably to 1 carrier in the Pacific And the 4 carriers we had, even though they were of an auxiliary type, would have been headed for the Pacific. Because you see, the American people in 1942 were very, relatively speaking, unhappy from a political, well, from every point of view. They were just furious at Japanese, especially for the surprise attack, and that we didn't seem to be responding with our forces to it. And we weren't, because the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Churchill reached agreement that our first priority ought to be on defeating Germany. Then we could switch and fight Japan. Well, that wasn't the idea of the American people. So they actually in the congressional elections in 1942, the Republicans made substantial gains because of the unhappiness of the American people with our paying so much attention to Europe and not Japan.
Is there anything you wish that more people knew about the Battle of Midway or the war in general?
Is there anything? Say it again.
Like, what is the most important or valuable piece of information that future generations of Americans should know about Midway?
I don't think that the American people even yet have an appreciation of how important that battle was overall. You read that article by Dr. Schlesinger, James Schlesinger. Before he wrote it, he asked me. I knew him. We knew each other, and he asked me what battle that I think was the most important in early American history, and I said I thought the battle up at Saratoga, Bemis Heights, is that the name of that? Well, you know, the one where we stopped the British from coming down. I thought that was the most important one in American history up to that point. But I said I think the Midway was probably even, well, today obviously was more important. But it took the United States Navy at least over 50 years themselves to celebrate the Battle of Midway. Well, at the 50th anniversary, there had a small celebration over the other side of Key Bridge at a hotel there. I mean, but the Navy it's really taken the Navy 70 years to reach, almost 70 years to reach the point where they decided it was the most important battle in American naval history.
Okay, what were the other highlights of your World War II service?
What was what?
What were the other highlights of your World War II service?
The highlights of my next service, well, I think it has to be, in retrospect, although I didn't see it at the time, I didn't know that as of 1943 we still had not overcome the threat of German submarine. So I say that as a fact. We had, at the time, I didn't know this. I was assigned to this escort carrier named the Santee, and we were going off into the mid-Atlantic, wide open space there, and didn't seem much to be done there. But we were doing what we were employed in doing was hunting down German submarine. And we had an effective new device. It was so secret that even though I was gunnery officer, I was not allowed in the gunnery spaces. It was a homing torpedo, where it would you drop this thing and it would home search and then home in on a submerged target. So I noted that one after another, we see everybody in the air department at least seemed to be happy. And it turns out that we got 4 German submarines. Now, and I didn't even know the context, but that was in mid-1943. And later, I received, to get the ship, we received a presidential unit citation. And I thought, Jesus, this is an unfair world. For all the Yorktown did in turning the tide in the Pacific, and this little pipsqueak carrier gets a presidential unit citation for hitting a few submarines in the Atlantic. Largely it was because you got to understand things in their larger context.
Yeah.
It's hard to do when you're on the scene and people don't want you talking about it.
Could you tell me about your post-World War II naval career?
Yes, yeah, because, well, as I told you, my big ambition from even before going to the Naval Academy was to MIT. I don't know whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I read that.
You know about MIT. That way, I mean, to a kid in New Hampshire, geez, I mean, that's like Mecca, being combined. Excuse me. And I realized, as I told you, that in order to do that from the Naval Academy and get your weight paid, hey, I knew that about because my father was an engineer, and I heard some guys that were naval officers just telling him, you know that the Navy sends guys to MIT and pays their salary and pays all the... Boy, that was my always... So, but anyway, so I put in a request as soon as I could to go to MIT and study naval construction and engineering, the 3-year graduate course. And I had done all the right things at the Naval Academy so as to make it. And was selected. The captain of our ship asked me, he says, Crawford, he says, why do you want to go to MIT? And I looked out at the starboard and saw this as captain. I said, you look over there at the Savannah. I said, I'd rather have been designed and been in charge of building that ship than commanding it. And that's like heresy. That's like telling a priest they shouldn't want to say that. I mean, so he signed. I mean, he followed. He allowed me. I mean, he approved my being detached. Okay. And and I got, after completing MIT, I was assigned to